Hey everyone, welcome to the live cast. I have a fun topic to talk about today that I know there is a lot of interest in because I see it happening at so many of my clients. The topic is how to sabotage a digital transformation. Now, let's go to that topic. Why am I talking about it today? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm talking about it today because tomorrow is the birthday of a relatively important figure in American history. It is the birthday of someone named Benedict Arnold. Now, you've probably heard the name Benedict Arnold. He is one of the most famous traitors in American history. He was on the side of the American Revolution, trying to win independence for the United States and build the country that we have today. And then he decided to switch. He was persuaded to switch, and we went back over to the British Army to fight against the American Revolution, our own government transformation that was trying to be driven hundreds of years ago here in the United States. And so that made him one of the most famous traitors in American history. And tomorrow is his birthday. January 14th, 1741 was his birthday. So that makes him, if he were still alive, 280 years old today. So I bet you there's not too many people remembering the anniversary of Benedict Arnold's birth today, but I am doing it because as one of the famous traitors of one of the greatest, most successful transformations in, I would argue, perhaps the history of the world, certainly the history of this country, he's an important figure in the topic of sabotage and trying to prevent change, albeit an unsuccessful one. In my book, now Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Winning Digital Customers, I talk a lot about the challenge of driving digital transformation and how one big part of that challenge is that a lot of people will resist and try to undermine the transformation. So I imagine there might be two types of people listening to today's live cast. There might be those who are thinking, I would like to try to undermine the digital transformation of my company, and I could use some tips and pointers on how to do it. Now, of course, while my mission in life is to support people and support companies in their digital transformation, I want to help anyone I can. So if that's your goal, well, listen on because I'm going to give you some tips. But probably more likely, you're somebody who is trying to drive digital transformation. And so the value of this topic to you is here are some of the things that may be on the minds of, your enemies, right? The people who are trying to oppose what you're doing. And as I always say, to me, digital transformation is so essential today because what is digital transformation really? Well, I always like to think of it as there's two layers to digital transformation. There's the digital transformation going on in the world. Your customers, your employees, your prospective employees, we have all been substantially changed by having a smartphone in our pocket with ubiquitous connectivity, which is only getting faster and faster and better with 5G. Our lifestyles have been changed by Instacart and Uber and Facebook and Amazon and all of these different tools that connect us to everything we do in our lives on a constant basis. The device we sleep beside the bed, that we wake up to, that we go to sleep to, that we check hundreds of times a day. We are mostly all living what I call a digital lifestyle, and therefore we've all become digital customers. And not just digital customers, digital employees, or whatever the relationship between people with your company might be. And that is a transformation you absolutely cannot stop. You absolutely cannot sabotage because it's too big. It's transforming the whole world. It's transforming us in this country. It's transforming people on every continent of the planet. But then there's the smaller scale digital transformation, which is the digital transformation of your company. Now, why would you want to transform your company? Well, when the world is changing, if you want your company to continue to be relevant, you've got to be prepared to change to keep up with what's relevant in the world today. That's a digital transformation that's happening within your company, if it's happening within your company. So it's pretty important. It's pretty important because if we look at all the companies that have failed over the last number of years, and there's so many of them, from Circuit City to Toys R Us to, the list of bankruptcies just goes on and on. If you look at that list, so many of them, it's because they failed to keep up. They may have made some changes to digital, but they failed to keep up at the pace of the change of the world. Those who listen regularly know I often like to quote Jack Welch, the legendary CEO of General Electric, who back in the 80s said, when the pace of change on the outside exceeds the pace of change on the inside, the end is near. So obviously that's a big challenge and problem for a lot of companies today, which is why digital transformation is an imperative. But that doesn't mean it's what you want for your company, even though it's probably essential to your company's long-term success. But let's just think for a moment, why might you as an individual not want digital transformation at your company. And by the way, if you are one of the people who does want it, you need to study this mindset, because this is the mindset of the people who are opposing you. And if you want to influence them and encourage them and change their minds, or if you fail to change their minds, at least be able to predict their offensive moves. I mean, I guess you could say offensive could have two different meanings there, but I mean offensive versus defensive. It's helpful to understand what's motivating them. So why would you not want digital transformation? Here's a few reasons. Maybe you're going to be out of that company in 6 months. Maybe you're even the CEO, and your bonus is calculated based on this year's performance. And investing in digital transformation takes cash out of the business, and it's probably going to take a couple years to see a result. And you just don't care. You just don't care where the business is a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. You're very short-term minded, so you may not care about digital transformation. And by the way, some investors are like that, and that's what can make it tough for CEOs. Investors don't always like companies that spend a lot of money now with a hope of return in the future. That can lower your stock prices in the short term. So that could be one reason that you don't want digital transformation. You're really just focused on the short term. Another reason, you might work there, your whole career might be invested in this company, and you just might not like change. Just the idea of change, it's just not appealing to you. Maybe you're the kind of person who likes to have a tuna sandwich and mashed potatoes for lunch every single day. And when someone offers you a hamburger, you're like, no, they could even offer you a lobster. No, I like my tuna sandwich and mashed potatoes every day. I don't want you messing around. Maybe you just like the way it is. You like the way you do business. You like the way you sell. You like the way you manage people. You don't want to deal with some new way of doing things. Some people don't want change just because of nostalgia. They like the past. Secondly, and I talk about this in depth in my book, I'm just going to touch on it. The truth is that people are wired in their DNA to be resistant to change to a certain degree. And I think it comes back. Evolutionary psychologists tell us that our brains evolved, of course, not in modern times, but in much more difficult times when we lived in the wilderness. And, if you were a Homo sapien, in the early days, and you found a cave that protected you from saber-toothed tigers or what have you, or a plain or a field where you could reliably kill an antelope and not starve, if you had it worked out so you could survive, your brain told you, don't mess with success, right? Don't change. Even if there was some threat to that, you tried to hang on to what you had. And that may be wired into our DNA that was sort of selectively bred into us. And now we have that. A lot of people have that natural instinct. Not everybody, but that could be a second reason. Just a kind of primordial resistance to dramatic change. Another is, change can just be stressful, right? If you've ever remodeled your kitchen, you know that even though if your kitchen's going to be much better in the end, there's that interim period where you can't walk, your refrigerator's not working and the place is filled with dust and stuff's got tarps taped up all over it, and you want to make breakfast and it's like a whole hassle. So you're cooking on a hot plate, so you have to go through very often a period of disruption before you get to the good stuff on the other side. And maybe you just don't want to deal with that. You don't want to deal with that pain. Another is fear of failure. People are saying, we're going to create a whole new digital supply chain. We're going to create a totally different customer experience. And you're like, gosh, what if that doesn't work? That could be even a bigger failure than what we have today. I think I'd rather stick, it's like, sometimes this one makes me think of somebody who's in a burning building, and, God forbid this should ever happen to any of you, but you're in a burning building. Let's say you're on the third floor, you're looking out the window, and there's somebody at the bottom with one of those big trampoline things that you're supposed to jump into, and they're telling you to jump out of the window and onto the trampoline. Well, on the one hand, the building's burning down. On the other hand, you're thinking to yourself, geez, I'm not sure this is such a safe thing to do, jump onto this trampoline. I've never done it before. What if I miss? What if I bounce off? I mean, it looks risky too. And of course, anytime we're talking about making a major transformation, there's no denying it is risky. So just standing there in that burning building, even if you see that it's burning around you, that fear of failure, that fear that the leap to get you to someplace better won't work, can also be a reason why you might not want change. And again, this is important to understand. If you're one of those people that's like, don't worry about that. I'm not thinking that way. I want to go, go, go. Just know that there are people in your organization where this is what's driving them. So if you want to influence them, if you want to be successful, if you want to fight them, if need be, you need to understand what motivates them. And lastly, it just might be bad for your career. If you're the person in charge of all the COBOL programming at your company, and you are a 30-year expert at COBOL, and you are planning to do a digital transformation to replace all those ancient COBOL systems with some new, modern technology stack that you don't know anything about, I mean, that might not seem like it's so good for you. And it might not be. If you run the call centers and they're going to switch to some AI-driven chatbots, and it's going to cause you from having 10 call centers to only one, and all of your experiences in call centers, of course, what you'd really want to do is start thinking to yourself, how do I use this knowledge that I have? How do I use my knowledge of not just COBOL programming, but the necessary technology of my industry and my company? How do I use my knowledge of customer service, not just call centers, to be part of a new digital world? But if you don't see yourself moving into that space and all of a sudden this digital transformation is bad for you, it can be true that some things can be great for the company and bad for any one individual, or requires an individual to figure out how to map a new career for themselves, which just isn't what they want and isn't what they plan. So the bottom line is, it might be good for the company, it might not be good for you. So you might have a rational reason to support something that's necessary for the long-term survival of your company, but frankly, is just not so good for you personally in your career. So these are some of the main reasons. And in my book, I actually talk about more reasons than this, but I'm cutting it off here not to force you by the book, but just to tell you, these are some of the main reasons. And I want to move on, of course, because what we promised in this video was how to sabotage. So all I've told you so far is why to sabotage. I haven't yet told you how to sabotage. So let's talk about that now. And again, if you are not a saboteur, and I like this picture here because you can see how this guy's just, sawing the tree limb, but, I had to crop it, so I'm not sure it's totally clear, but, obviously he's sitting on the part of the tree limb he's sawing off, right? So obviously, he's cutting off his nose to spite his face with that kind of smirk on his face, like he doesn't know what's coming. Is that a bottle of beer he's got in his, I'm not sure. Anyway, obviously if you're not the intended saboteur, I tell you these things because it's good to know some of the common tactics that people use to try to sabotage digital transformation. Don't get yourself lulled because you believe so strongly that something is necessary. And you may be right. It may be essential to the future success of your company, and you have all the stats and figures, and you are absolutely certain it's the right thing to do. Do not assume that because you are communicating that message to all these people, they are all on board. As I just mentioned in my previous slide, there's all kinds of reasons why they may not be with you. They may not want it. So expect sabotage to any major change within an organization, digital or otherwise, and know what some of the top techniques are so you are prepared to counter them. Before a football team goes on the field, they study videotapes of their competitor from previous games to understand what kind of plays they run. This is that sort of thing. A boxer, before they go into the ring, they study videotapes of the opponent to understand what are the moves they make, what are the types of swings they do, how do they block, so that they can figure out how they are going to be able to successfully go around those tactics that their opponent at least may very well use because they've used them in the past. So what I want to give you here is, from my experience working at dozens and dozens of large companies and seeing many talented, intelligent, articulate executives who simply don't want the change, apply all of their skill and talent to trying to block change. They're talented at politics. They're talented at communication. And, I've seen them sometimes do it very, very successfully. So again, forewarned is forearmed. Let me tell you some of the most common tactics. And again, there's actually more than this in the Winning Digital Customers book. And we can put up a link where you can actually get that book for a special discount price. So I'll ask Caitlin or someone on the team to put that link up on the screen for you, and we'll put it in the notes. But for now, let me give you some of the main ways. How do you sabotage? So the first thing I want to advise you, if you are the saboteur, is you never want to disagree to improving things, right? If someone says, hey, should we make our company better? You don't want to be the one that says, no, I don't think we should get better, because you will lose that argument every time. If you're trying to block change, you need to have more nuanced arguments than just, I'm against change. If you just say you're against change, you sound unreasonable, and then people will discount everything else you say. But you can argue that we don't need radical change. Right? Say, listen, our business is doing well. Sure, we may have seen some downturns. Sure, the market's always changing, but we've had downturns in the past. But we have a good business here, and let's be careful about doing anything that's too radical. We want improvement, but just let's just not go crazy, right? So that's the first point you can make. You want to make sure that you're still cheerleading for the general idea of trying to improve things. The second is, when someone comes with a transformation opportunity, you really want to point out the costs and the risks, and that includes the opportunity costs. If we're going to spend $20 million or $200 million or whatever it is, potentially doing some radical new thing, obviously that's a significant investment. But also, what's it going to take focus off of? I remember one time I was trying to help pitch a big new digital system for a big theme park. And the people who were against it was complete transformation to how they sold tickets and other things. Said, well, one of the things we've planned for this year is to redo the AstroTurf in a big area of our theme park. And we really think that's really important. And if we do this project, we won't have the money or we won't have the time to focus on redoing the AstroTurf, right? So point out, what won't you get? If you spend money on this, or you spend time and energy and focus on this digital transformation, what does that mean you won't be able to do? In fact, if you can find some pet project of the CEO and say, oh man, if we do this, we won't have money to redecorate the executive office suite, or whatever you think that CEO really doesn't want to hear is going to get cut, or the money or the efforts diverted from. We're going to have our IT team work on this project. They're not going to be able to do that HR transformation you want, And by the way, that's probably not true, right? There's always usually a way to get multiple things done. But of course, it is true, of course, that when you focus on one thing, it inevitably takes focus away from something else. So try to point that out, right? You want to sort of simultaneously point out how it's questionable whether it's necessary, even though I'm telling you it probably is really necessary. And it's really gonna be a cost. It's going to be a distraction. What's number 3? We've been doing things this way for a long time. Things have been fine. Why do we need this kind of radical change? Which kind of is similar to number 1, or at least similar to what I said about number 1. But I guess the main point of number 1 was, agree to improvements. Don't say they're radical. Number 3 is you're really reminding everybody, you guys want to make all this change, but we've been successful for so many years. Of course, the problem with that argument, every argument has a flip side, right? At one point I was in high school debate, not for very long, to be honest. I didn't really like it very much, but you get trained. And the reason actually I didn't like high school debate is because you have to be able to do both sides of the argument, right? So there'd be an argument like, should the US get rid of its nuclear weapons? And then you'd have to be ready to debate either side. You didn't actually know when the competitive debate started whether you were going to be assigned to argue that they should or that they shouldn't. So you had to be able to argue both sides of an argument. I never liked it because I felt like I had an opinion and I wanted to argue my side. I didn't want to argue the other side. But, there is something to be said for looking at the other side. It does help you improve your side as well. And that's, of course, what we're doing here. In any case, point is that when people make the argument that we've been successful for a long time, the truth of the matter is that, over the last number of decades, the world hasn't changed nearly as much as it's changed in the last 10 years. And in the last year, it's changed probably more than it's changed in the prior 9 years because of COVID and the further acceleration of digital transformation. So it may have worked for a long period of time, but that was a period where there was less change. And of course, that may vary slightly based on your industry, and the exact timing of the change may vary. But if you look at a hospital, hospitals 5 years ago worked pretty much the way they worked 20 years before that, mostly. But now they really need to change in much more radical ways. And so that's why this is not a good argument. The it's worked for a long time argument is not really valid in a time of dramatic change in the world. One thing you can do is to try to say, do we know for sure that we need to do this? Do we know absolutely certainly that this investment is necessary? That's always an argument that the other side can never say yes. Other side can never say, you can never be in this world, and certainly not in business, 100% certain of anything. So try to take advantage of that. Try to take advantage of the fact that you can't actually prove that the transformation, can you prove that the company would not be successful without this transformation? You can show a trend. You can indicate why your forecast is that it won't be as successful. But can you prove it? Can you prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt? Probably not. Again, very weak argument because nothing in this world is absolutely provable. But sometimes a weak argument wins if the other side doesn't know the counter argument, which is why we're here, right? Because I want you to be understanding what these arguments are going to be, so you're ready with the counter argument. Another is to disagree with the vision, right? In other words, someone can come in and say, we need to transform. And let's say you're not going to win the argument against transformation. Everyone agrees, yes, the world has changed. Yes, we need to change. And maybe you decide that, I don't think I can win convincing people that that is not true. But then when someone comes in and says, well, I need $100 million because I want to replace our system with this new version of SAP, or I want to create a new app, or I want to redo the store experience, you can start disagreeing with the vision, with the plan. You could say, yes, let's transform, but not that way, right? That's not the right way to transform. Now, you might say to yourself, well, how does that block the transformation? Mostly it's delays. Mostly it delays it. Because if the team comes back and says, here's our plan, and you're able to convince everybody, I don't think that's the right plan. I want you to go back and come up with an alternative plan. And then they go work for 3 months, come up with an alternative plan, and they come back and be like, yeah, I just don't think we have it. We'll know it when we see it. I'm all for transformation. By all means, let's transform, but it has to be the right plan, because of course you can't deny that is it possible for your company that needs to transform into something worse? That is absolutely possible, right? It is not enough just to change, right? It's like if I say my diet is not healthy. I need to change my diet. Great. Could I change it and make myself less healthy? Of course I could. So what you change is as important as the decision to change. If you're trying to sabotage the transformation, just never approve any change. Agree that you like the idea of change, but every change that comes back, quibble with it, have a problem with it, disagree with it. But don't be too specific, because if you're too specific, then maybe they can come back and say, okay, we fixed the problem. But if you just say, gosh, I'll know it when I see it. I don't think you guys have it yet. Go back and work on it some more. Now, of course, depending on your role, right? If you're the CEO, maybe you can get away with that. If you're a few levels down, you might start to sound unreasonable. So you may have to give some reasons, but in any case, you can play that game and you can delay things for a long time just by getting people to kind of go, yeah, I'm not sure. And it goes to that point of it goes kind of back to point number 4. When you say to the team, how do we know if we invest $15 million in this new app you want to build that we'll get more customers? And they might say, oh, well, we've done this test with 20 users. And this is the kind of work that I do in my company, right? We'll do a test. We'll do some market research. They liked it more. And then you can say 20 users. I mean, is 20 people enough to change our business? We have 100,000 customers. And they say, well, no, they will say it's a representative sample. And you say, well, how convinced are you? And also that was just a prototype, right? It wasn't the full experience that you tested, right? And they'll say, well, no, of course not, because it's not built yet. We haven't spent the $20 million. And then you could say, well, so $20 million is a lot of money, right? Goes back to point number 2, right? How do I know for sure that if we spend the $20 million, we're going to get this result? Are you willing to put your neck on the line, your job on the line? Can you promise me? Can you swear on your mother's life? And of course, again, nothing's for certain, right? In digital, you have to try something. You put something out there. It works in some ways. It doesn't work in other ways. You have to iterate. So you can win an argument just by proving the fact that this investment is not certain. And, that may, in other words, even if you agree on changing, the specific vision, may not be able to be proved to be successful. Another thing is you can create budget and funding problems. You can say, well, we'd love to do this, but, and it kind of relates to something I said earlier, we have other priorities. If we do this, we won't be able to do that. I kind of covered that one already in one of the other topics. And then lastly, this is one of the biggest ones. Sometimes you just can't stop the moving train. Sometimes there's just too much excitement around something new, and everyone agrees, yes, we're going to give these guys $20 million. They're going to do this big transformation. Great. You haven't lost yet. Because are they going to spend $20 million tomorrow? No. That transformation is going to take time. It's going to take 6 months, a year, 2 years. I don't know. It depends on what it is. And so what you can do is keep on top of it. Tell them, I want regular status reports. I want to know, what's your plan? Show me your Gantt chart. I want to see whether you're on plan every step of the way. And all you have to do is wait for them to slip up. Wait for them to make a mistake. What they said they would have the requirements finished in 30 days. You're having a status meeting at 45 days. The requirements are only 75% finished. What's going on? This project is off the rails. They do some technology work and they discover a problem. There's a performance problem, or the back-end system doesn't seem to be able to connect the way they thought it to. They're going to have to research it. They're going to have to solve that problem. Big visionary stuff is always going to have lots and lots of problems, which is great if you're the saboteur, because all you have to do is come back and say, guys, this is not the way you told us it was going to be. Okay, we gave you $20 million and you've already spent, $800,000 of the $1 million. You're already behind schedule. You're already discovering problems. We got to put this thing out of its misery. This isn't working. At this rate, this project's going to take 10 years and it's going to cost $1 billion. We can't afford that. You guys didn't have your act together when you proposed this. You didn't understand what you're doing. We got to kill this thing right now. I got to tell you, I've seen more great projects that were killed 10% of the way in, 20% of the way in, because people just lost faith. People have that initial enthusiasm about helping you move forward. But if you show the slightest reason for doubt, then there's people who are going to be ready to sort of get buyer's remorse and say, you know what, we better cut our losses. I can't tell you how many great things in sort of corporate America I've seen killed for these reasons. And I've also had many executives agree with me that if Google as a product, the Google search engine, if that had been started as a project at a major company, like a large, Fortune 500 company, it would probably have been killed before it ever became a success, because they would have said, don't forget, Google didn't make any money for the first couple years. Don't forget, in the early years, there were legal challenges. Companies said, Google, how dare you spider my website? Who gave you permission to do that, right? There were problems. Uber, look at Uber, for crying out loud. Uber gets sued by almost every city in which they operate. They have to fight with the courts. And in sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. If they were part of a giant transportation company, that company would have probably shut the thing down. They would have said, oh, forget it. We can't handle this kind of hassle. Now, of course, Uber's worth probably more than all those companies put together. So, any kind of big transformation is inevitably going to hit problems. If your goal is to sabotage it, if they get started, you just got to sit back, pay close attention, wait for the problems to start rolling in, and try to just make your case that these problems have just added up to too much. This thing's totally out of control. It's off the rails, and we need to kill it. So there's probably more sabotage techniques, but in the interest of not making this video too long, those are the top ones that I wanted to talk about today. And of course, as I've been saying all along, my real hope in this video is not so much to support a saboteur. I certainly don't have a consulting practice or a book to sell you if you are a saboteur, but really to just raise your awareness to the fact that these saboteurs, they will exist. They are inevitable. They are in every single company. And from their perspective, they're doing the right thing. From their perspective, there's all kinds of reasons to resist. And what you need to do is to be ready, to be expecting these kinds of tactics, these kinds of arguments, and be ready to counter them. Take the last one, for example. How do you counter the fact that you're going to slip up, and when you do, there will be some people who will use that as an excuse to try to kill your project? Well, first of all, when you're selling the project, sell it by telling people, this isn't going to go perfectly, guys. I don't want to don't be so enthusiastic to get your $20 million in funding that you sell it as such a rosy path that as soon as you hit a problem, it sounds like you sold them a false bill of goods, because you'll never win that way. You got to let them know, guys, this is an innovation project. This is a transformation. My estimates are not perfect. Victory is not assured. We have every reason to be confident. And we think that our odds of winning by doing this are much greater than our odds of winning by doing nothing, right? So this absolutely makes sense to do, but a big transformation like this has all kinds of risks. In my book, Winning Digital Customers, I talk about a whole bunch of different types of risks: legal risks, technology risks, adoption risks, et cetera, and how you can pre-think those risks. You want to go in and let people know, guys, there's a lot of risks here. And by the way, involve your stakeholders. Say, what are the risks do you see? So we can all sit here and agree together that there are a lot of risks. But by identifying those risks up front, we can create a plan to try to overcome some of those risks. But don't be shocked. You're telling your stakeholders, don't be shocked if I come back to you after 30 days and tell you we've got some problems, right? I will be doing that. And I will be asking for your help in solving them. Because, it's like if you're trying to steer a ship across the ocean, if you hit a storm, you don't necessarily turn around. You navigate around the storm, right? Maybe you have to stop and wait for a few days for the storm to clear and then you move forward. Or maybe you adjust your course. This is what you have to do. So you need to set the expectation and involve your stakeholders in helping be problem solvers instead of judges. Instead of setting them up to say, you give me this money and I guarantee you everything will go perfectly, because then you're vulnerable. Then as soon as there's a problem, your credibility plummets. And then someone says, this guy that we said we were going to give $20 million, or this woman that we said we're going to give $20 million to, has already spent $800,000, and already it's not going the way they said it would. The saboteur is right. They probably won't call him the saboteur. Benedict Arnold is right. This isn't going to work. We need to stop this right now and cut our losses. Because the reality is, in corporate America, while there can be big rewards for being successful, there can also be big punishments for wasting money and for being unsuccessful. You make the wrong decision and, you might find yourself with, as they say, more time to spend with your family. So these people who are making decisions to fund and support your digital transformation efforts, they need to know what they're getting into, to be fair to them. And they need to be able to set expectations at the next level, which might be the board of directors or whatever, and make sure everybody really understands the risks and has the right expectations about what's going to happen next. And then, of course, when problems do happen, you need to project confidence. You need to remind people about why this is being done. Why are we doing this transformation? Why is it so important? Why did they make the wise decision to invest in it? And what's your plan to overcome the problem? And, what's the impact going to be? And be honest about it, but positive about it. And if you're not positive, if you're not sure how you're going to get around it, well, then you need to be resourceful and figure out how can you get positive by leveraging the resources you need, outside experts, whatever it may be. I mean, obviously that's part of my business, coming into companies that are having difficulties and say, our ship has hit a rock. what do we do? And I can come in and be able to say, well, I've been brought into a lot of ships that have hit rocks, so I know a lot of ways to get ships off rocks, or if it's not me, someone else. But, that's one way, right? Point is, if you don't know what to do next, before you go back to that group, hopefully, get the help you need to come up with a plan, because whatever problem you've encountered, it can be fixed, I guarantee it. It's just you got to figure out what it is. If it's a technology problem, if it's a people problem, if it's a customer adoption problem, whatever. So, okay, that's probably enough for today. Those are my tips for you on why you might want to sabotage a digital transformation, why others may want to sabotage the digital transformation that you are trying to lead, what are the most likely techniques that they're going to use, and I've touched on, at least for some of those techniques, how you can overcome them. More about this in my book, Winning Digital Customers. We'll put that URL up again if you want to pick up a copy of it. There's a special price. It's super inexpensive. I mean, listen, if this is a book that can help you turn around your company, even if it was $30 and it's less, whatever the sale price is, it's nothing, right? A book's so cheap. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I really, really appreciate that you're here. Remember to say happy birthday to Benedict Arnold today. Get a little muffin or a cupcake and light a little candle for him. I'm sure he'd appreciate that. Traitor though he was. Because, remember this. Everybody does whatever they do out of a positive intention. Whatever reason Benedict Arnold had for leaving the American Revolution and going over to the British, I'm sure he felt it was the right thing to do. And I want you to remember that as you're dealing with traitors within your own organization, because they're humans too. And, they may be doing it just to protect themselves, or they may be doing it because they're afraid. People are fearful, And so instead of seeing them as a villain, try to see them as a human being that sees it differently than you. When you empathize with them, you'll be in I'm not promising that you'll be able to influence and change their minds, but you'll at least be in a better position to understand what they're doing and therefore be able to predict it and counter it, evasive action. And furthermore, you may be in a better position to help make them comfortable and help bring them on board. And sometimes if their discomfort level is a 10 out of 10, you don't have to get them to be a raving supporter. You just have to get them to be a little bit less violently against it, a little more willing to not oppose it with such force. And that may be all you need from that person if there's other people who are really a champion. So don't expect you're necessarily going to turn a violent opposer into a champion. You might, but if you don't, it might not matter. It might be enough to just take them down a little bit off the ledge or off the tree branch, or get them to stop sawing, or at least stop sawing for a little while. Get them to say, all right, I'm going to give this another 6 months. Just try to understand where they're coming from, because you may be able to deal with them more effectively than, open combat in the boardroom. But if you have to go to open combat in the boardroom, hopefully some of this content is helpful to you in planning for it. So that's my talk for today. Hope this has been helpful. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye.